Welcome to Closer to Venus. This is Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Bob Frank, author of the Third Eye Trilogy. Bob, welcome to Closer to Venus.
Thank you very much, Johnny. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. I couldn't help but notice, speaking of the Third Eye Trilogy, your books ask some very serious questions. One, I couldn't wait to ask you this. What if historical figures reincarnated over and over again were only actually a handful of souls?
Yeah, that was in the first book of the trilogy. As it turned out, each of the books in the trilogy, which is really fiction. Fiction is just a way to convey messages, and really, I ended up over the course of the years that I wrote them is really developing a theory of reality, and this was a way to convey those out, and it really relates to one of the fundamentals of what is now my theory of reality is that we all have a soul. Mm-hmm. And these souls incarnate over and over and over again. Now, it's referred to as reincarnation. I prefer to just say incarnation, but they come over and over and over again. Right. And through my research, I did a lot of research on it because originally I was a 35-year hardcore atheist. And that means that's totally contrary to any concept of souls and incarnation. Exactly. So, and over the course of research, because I'm an engineer by trade, by history, so a very, very left-brained, thinking, analytical person. I read 30 plus books on past lives and regression and reincarnation, and I got into one thing after another, and I kept reading and came to the conclusion that this is real. I believe it's real. So that kind of didn't make me a non-atheist. It just changed the whole concept. And one key thing about incarnations, if the soul itself has a basic personality and it has a certain tendency to do things, and that's what all the books on past life regressions showed. All the research from University of Virginia did 30, 40 years of research in this field, that the souls have a tendency, they got a personality, and they'll incarnate over and over. And they kind of carry these characters through. So I sort of, in the first novel, is, well, what if we just had all of the famous people, historical, whether they be political, religious, scientific, philosophical, they just reincarnated one after another.
I couldn't help, I'm sorry, I couldn't help but think of something just now. So that means that Mussolini could have actually reincarnated into Trump, and that's not so far-fetched, but I also thought of maybe Beethoven reincarnated into the guitar player from Muse because he's so ridiculously out of this world talented.
Exactly. There's some basic concepts of beliefs that children who are prodigies, right? Child prodigies are incarnations of people. I'll say an existence as example. A child, 3 years old, sits down at a piano and plays Mozart. You come up with the question of, well, could that child have been the reincarnation or incarnation from a soul that in the past had been a fabulous piano player? Mm-hmm. Or musician. So there's a lot of discussion and theories that, in fact, child prodigies are just incarnations from people or souls that had a tendency to like or were very good at one particular thing or another.
Right, and that reminds me of something. I don't know if you'd call him the father of reincarnation theory, or I don't know, maybe I'm using the wrong words, but Dr. Ian Stevenson did a study on children years ago, I believe in the 60s, at the University of Virginia. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he discovered children that remembered past lives, was able to speak in different languages, and he actually went as far as to corroborate the evidence and actually did that version of fact-checking. Did that actually happen?
Exactly. He'd written several books that are out there in his research at the University of Virginia. Mm-hmm. And an example in one of the books, he put out 10 cases in India This is in the mid 70s to the mid 80s. 10 cases in India, which were, I would call them proven cases of reincarnation. He had another 10 cases in Sri Lanka, 12 cases in Lebanon and Turkey. He had another 12 cases in Thailand and Burma. Now, you notice a common theme. They're not typically in Europe or North America.
Right, right.
And there's reasons for that, because I believe, typically the religions have sort of injected themselves into the cultural aspect of non-acceptance of the concept of reincarnation. So as soon as a child, and most of these cases, almost all these cases are in children, typically under the age of 6, because they're uncontaminated by outside influences. They just are totally open-minded. If you just look at the data, I call them proven cases of reincarnation. You have to look at the data, because to me, I'm a left brain person. You got to look at the data, because it's going to tell you a lot.
I could not agree more. I actually had this, let's say, argument, but I was at dinner the other night. Some friends of my sister, I live in South Florida, so there's kind of a definite conservative population here, and they were kind of trying to debunk what I was saying in a polite manner, of course. And I basically rebutted that with, well, I'm not really here to convince or convert anybody, but that reminds me of what you just said. In Western culture, we have that tendency of, we only believe in what the church tells us. Almost nobody talks about past lives and near-death experiences, which brings me to another question. Speaking of near-death experiences, you've had a lot of exposure in this space. You were involved with IANDS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, as a board member and also as a president. Am I right?
Yeah, what it is I was going through the research, past lives and regressions and reincarnation. And I go through it. In the regression process for individuals, you always take them to the death. There's a very consistent thing when in these induced states where people go to their past lives, they see the death. And there's a sequence of things that sort of happen. And what I saw was a common thread with near-death experiences. And IANDS, it's 40-some-year-old organization, a purely nonprofit, research-based, came out of the universities, is still today focused in the universities. And I saw a common thread between the two. Mm-hmm. So I began to draw to it, and I said, wow, there's some really good data here. It goes back to my left brain, the data. And so I volunteered to the organization, started to engage with them, went to their conferences and volunteered. The next thing you know, they asked me to come on the board. I was on the board about 6 years. In my last 2 years, I ended up as the president of the organization. And it's really intended to do research and assist people who have had near-death experiences. Now, these are the people who've, in our world, have died in different ways, and they came back to life. Yep. And when they came back, some very, very consistent threads that they're just common things that come out of these near-death experiences. And I saw a correlation between these past life regressions and the near-death experience. And some interesting things about the near-death experience, as I work with thousands of these people, it's just enamoring to talk with them and listen to their experiences. And some of the common things are, you'll never find two experiences that are exactly identical. And you're not going to probably may not find one single thing that's common in every near-death experience, but it is very, very consistent, which are 10 or 12 different kinds of things, right? Common themes that come out. And one is the out-of-body experience. The entity, whatever the human is, whatever the person is, comes out of the physical body when they die. And they're referred to as vertical perceptions, meaning that there is proof that that person, what they convey during the time that they are dead, whether it be they've drowned underwater, or whether it be their heart stopped, or while they're in a coma, they convey experiences and things that they saw that there is no way possible that they could have seen or heard the events that they describe.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Another conversation, and this is just a few nights ago, I was at dinner with my family, mm-hmm. and they spoke about a friend of theirs. This guy is actually a semi-famous baseball player. I won't mention his name here, but he had that kind of experience. Something happened during a procedure. He actually rose. He could see down on the operating table with the nurses and the doctors and so forth. And apparently he was unconscious. And just like you had just mentioned, how can anybody explain how he can look down? And this has probably happened in thousands of cases, and heard what they said and watched their behavior and so on. Which, here's another thing I've been wanting to ask you, is that when we talk about cases like this, right, what is the criteria where someone can basically discern whether they're a participant or an observer? What is the difference between a bona fide near-death experience and something which was just part of your imagination?
They're at least the way I see it, it's kind of interesting about the near-death experience. A great number of these near-death experiences are conveyed years after the event occurred. Mm-hmm. And the reason is, it goes back to the same reason why most of the cases of proven reincarnation are done on the other side of the world, because Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, other religions do not interfere with children who have these experiences. It's the same thing in the near-death experience. People are so scared to death of what other people say, mm-hmm. they crush it. They crush their experience because they say, "Oh my God, he's been brain damaged because he lost oxygen and his brain is damaged, and he saw dead people and tunnels, and he's seeing these spirit entities, and he's getting messages of telepathic messages and such." So people crush it for, I think the average is probably around 10 years.
Really?
They do not talk about it because their family, their friends, their doctors will not allow them to open themselves up.
Interesting. Wow.
Probably a good example is my mother. When I was debating, this gets into the concept of synchronicity. And mm-hmm. Are we in our own little life plans? Then this comes out as a common thread from both past life inductions and from my research in the near-death experience area, is that we all have plans and goals in our lives. So when we incarnate, we're here for a purpose. We are here for a reason.
Right.
And part of that comes, what I think mine was, to understand this and convey these messages. That's part of what we're doing today, is part of my objective. I was going to go on the board of IANDS, and I said, I just don't, this is a lot of time. That's not really, I'm going to drop off. And even though I just gone on the board a month, I said, I'm going to drop back because it's just, I'm not in it. My mother had a near-death experience in front of me.
Oh, okay. So you had a shared, so that's considered a SDE, a shared death experience.
It's not, in my particular case, in that particular case, it wasn't shared death, but I believe it was part of the plan. Now you say, okay, "Oh, God is pulling the strings," and I don't think so. I think there's other reasons. We can go to that in a little bit later, but to kind of convey this message is when I lived over in Phoenix. My mother and sister lived in Florida. My mother had surgery. It was emergency surgery. Went into the hospital. My sister said, "You better come over here and help." So, I said, "I'm on the plane. I'm on the way." My mother had the surgery. Then she had a follow-up surgery while I was in the air. And when I got to Florida, went to the house, mother said, "We got to go. We got to go now. Can I just use the bathroom? Can I drop my stuff off?" "No, we got to go right now to the hospital." So, okay, let's go. We ran there within 5 minutes of us getting to the airport. Now, this is about a day and a half after my sister called. My mother had her NDE. She died. They when we walked into her room, she was in the dying process. They coded her out. In comes the crash carts. In comes all the stuff. And they threw my sister and I out in the hallway. Then my sister was actually worked in part of that hospital. So everybody knew her. And my mother was a candy striper for 8 or 10 years in the hospital. So everybody knew her. So the word went through, "Oh my gosh, she's here, and she's gone." They sent us out in the hallway because there was 12 people in the room trying to bring her back. And so we went down to the nurse's station, 20 meters down the hall. And all these people are coming by to see my sister, asking about it, doctors, nurses, and such. And so my mother had her experience. And she died. They brought her back. They saved her. She didn't say anything. She was in the hospital 4 more days. We got her home. We're sitting in the kitchen table. And she looks over at me, and she knew I was open-minded. And my sister was open-minded. And she says, "I just wanted to tell you guys that I saw my mother." And we're like, "What?" And our mother died 26 years before. "I saw my mother." And so we're kind of like, "When?" and said, well, you were standing here. And she described exactly what happened when she was just phasing out. I mean, totally out. And she said, well, you were here, you were there, she was there, described the whole thing. And there's all these other people. Well, what other people? Yeah. We said, yeah, there was doctors and nurses and all this. She's no, not the ones with the green and the blue outfits. These were all in white. We're like, what? Said,
right. Okay.
And then she described her mother, who was only as she remembered her when her mother was young. And so we kind of went through this whole scenario and said, okay, and then what happens? And I knew then, because that was a month after I joined the boards on IANDS, I knew what happened. I know she had the near-death experience. So I kind of said, well, just, I want to let you know there's going to be a lot of stuff's probably going to happen. And what she did is she conveyed something to us. She says, she looked at my sister and she goes, I just want to tell you that you were wrong. And my sister said, what? And she said, you said I was going to die. Wow. And that I was dying. And that is, and she said it word for word, what my sister conveyed to me at the nurse's station behind two curtains, a big wooden door, and 20 yards down the hallway. Exact words. And then she goes, oh, by the way, how's Dr. Such and Such? I haven't seen him for years. And my sister goes, what? And he was one of the doctors that stopped by and was talking to my sister while we were at the nurse's station, while she was having her out-of-body experience during that dying sequence. And so, and this goes on. There was all kinds of other things around that just verified. It verified everything for me of what the near-death experiencers see and experience out of the body. She saw everything that was going on. I could go into it details for an hour, but I don't want to, tie all the time. But it confirmed. So I said, I'm in with IANDS. I am in, because I now really, really believe it. I saw everything firsthand.
Yeah, I think seeing it firsthand like you did, there's no substitute for that. And that's extremely cool of you to share that with us, because I don't know of too many. I've heard of people, like a friend of mine told me he had something like that when he was younger. He took the wrong medication or something like that, and he didn't see anything. But he said the feeling was, it was, you were in some kind of tunnel, and it was complete peace.
Yes.
Nirvana, feeling of love. He didn't see any of his relatives or anything like that. But when he came back, he looked at the doctor and said, "Why did you bring me back? What's significant?" He'd be the first one to say, "You know what? This is a bunch of crap. Don't believe it." So that made a believer of me. When we talk about the near-death experiences, a lot of them are pleasant, feeling of love, white light, council of elders, a life review, and so forth. But what about the dearth of reports of the not so pleasant, the unpleasant, or even the hellish NDEs? Why don't we?
First on that one, it's a very, very small percentage. The ones that do experience this, they're a little bit boisterous because it was not a good thing. So it's a couple of percent of the near-death experiences experience this bad experience.
Right.
But the interesting thing is most of them, even though they had the bad experience initially, they transition into the other good experience, but they still recall the bad side. Now that's what you might call, oh my God, I'm in purgatory. Oh my God, I went to hell. It's in hell.
It scares. It literally scares the life. Well, it scares the life out of them, but you get the point.
And I think part of that may relate back to the individual's life experience. Mm-hmm. And I relate this gets a little bit off a track of these, but I had a one-on-one conversation about 45 minutes with someone who gets into really the esoteric of you can call them ghosts, or you can call them disconnected souls. There's lots of things that you can call them that don't move into that other realm. They don't leave the physical realm. They kind of hang around the physical realm, and they don't go on. And this guy conveyed a message. At one time, he was doing this sort of a soul detachment. The Catholics kind of refer to it as exorcism, because these souls, if they don't completely transition into this other realm, that's my term, is the other realm, which some might say heaven. It depends on what you want to call it, but it's this other realm that's out there where the souls reside when they're not here. Michael Newton, he calls them the life between lives. It's
Lives
somewhere
between
else.
lives. Yes, I've heard
Yeah,
about that.
it's somewhere else. If they don't completely transition out, and he said this fellow was telling me, he said he got one. He was in a mafia, and he was a Italian Catholic. His entity talked to his soul entity that wouldn't move on, and he was so scared that if he transitioned, he's going to go straight to hell, because all of his religious background said that when you die, and if you're bad, you're going to burn in hell forever. So
Interesting. Okay.
the soul recalled that from the learning that he had in that particular life, and would not move on. And so when they have an NDE that's negative, sometimes I think possibly there could be things in that life that kind of skews that soul's acceptance of what they see. So it's a very interesting thing. I'd when I was studying hypnotherapy and inductions to do past life regressions, that was part of all the research I did for the 3 novels that I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I actually took a course in what they call spirit detachment, which is that exorcism, detachment, send them on their way.
Okay.
And part of that is about getting that soul to look around and find some other soul that's out there to come get them, which is exactly what the near-death experiencer sees. In my mother's case, her mother came and said, "I'm here," and she basically got the message. It's all telepathic. Got the messages, "I'm here when you're ready, and I'll help you transition." So if there's no one there to help, that soul might be afraid to move on, and they may get stuck in this dark sensation. But the point being, there's a very, very small percentage of people that have the negative near-death experiences. It's a very small percentage.
When we talk about the near-death experiences, the good ones and the not so good ones, and a lot of us that kind of dig into this research are trying to figure out, ultimately, talk about karma. Are we responsible for our actions? It seems to me that for every action, there's a reaction. And if you did bad stuff in your life, it's like destroying your credit. You have to work to repair it. To get off the karmic treadmill, as some people will describe it, you got to do some work. So if we briefly just go into that space where that person that, let's say, they don't have a near-death experience, they have what you call, I believe, a full death experience, where they go into live between lives, whether it's through meditation or actual hypnosis, and they meet with their guides and their council of elders and so on. They're basically told, well, you did these things right, but you weren't so good at this. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a choice. You can either do this or that. It's blue or yellow. Because if you want to ascend, if you want to grow spiritually, there's some things you need to work on. Now, I'm sure they're a lot more articulate than I am, but you get the point, where you just can't do bad stuff, kill people and do this and that and rob and just treat people poorly and expect to, have St. Peter or the rough equivalent waiting for you at the gates and say, cool, the 24 virgins are over there. The river of bourbon is over here. The nonstop Led Zeppelin music is there. I don't think it works that way. Do you?
No, I think it's quite different than what I'll call them the dogmatic religions convey to us, whether it be Christian or whether it be Hindu. Hindu is really heavy into the karma. Christians, you got to be good or you burn in hell. It's a very different concept. Reality is there is no one in that other realm, in this heaven. There's no St. Peter who's going to sit there with his big book and say, "Oh, you are bad. Get out of here. You're not coming in." There's no one in that other realm, no other souls in the other realm that will judge you. In that other realm, when they see this, they refer to as the council of elders, or they see these other very more experienced souls or guides. They don't judge you. All they do is they will work with you in those induced states, whether it be near-death experience, what they refer to as an STE, or I call it a significant transformative event. Others call it spiritually transformative experience, but an STE is similar to an NDE, but you just don't die. Or you take DMT, or you take ayahuasca. There's different induction methods. When you go to those and you see these elders, there's no judgment. You are your own judge.
Or your own judge. Okay.
You are your own judge. All they'll do is they're going to be in this circle or whatever form that they're in. They show you the life that you just lived, whether you come back or you continue to you continue to die and move on into that other realm, depending on how the induction method is or the NDE happens. And you say, I didn't do very good at this. Boy, I really blew that one. So you judge yourself and you say, did I learn the lesson or not? And if you didn't learn the lesson, then the choice is to you. Do you want to learn the lesson? Do you want to feel the pain? Do you want to feel the anguish that you caused other people? And so what it is, you make the choice. So I'm going to incarnate. I make the choice. I, the soul, make the choice. I will incarnate in this setting, in this scenario, on this continent, and I will suffer the consequences. I will be on the experience side, something that I did to others that caused tremendous amounts of pain and anguish, or something. So that's the karma aspect of it. So I think the Hindus' concept of karma, or Buddhists, they have that concept of karma, is not exactly, if you do this, you're gonna get the other thing. If you, my wife is Chinese, of not necessarily a Buddhist faith, but raised there, they have the concept of Buddhism. Mm-hmm. They said, you step on that cockroach, next life, you're a cockroach. So
I agree.
I don't believe it's that.
I never did either. That was a great explanation. So my interpretation was a little bit off, but what you just said kind of confirmed what I thought anyways, that you don't really get judged, but you judge yourself. Yes. And you have a choice. So it seems like I make the choice to go back and experience the pain that I caused others. If I don't, that means if I go back, I'm going to have to do the same thing all over again until I finally see the light and say, you know what, I need to do more work. And
I relay that to those who have had NDEs from suicide. I think it's the NDE that they have during a suicide, if assuming they aren't successful, changes their life significantly. Well, the NDEs themselves are one very, very common theme is most NDE experiencers lose the fear of death. They're not afraid of death anymore. When you get a suicider, for the most part, I think, is that they come back and they say, well, I failed to meet the challenge that I was given and I gave up. So they think what it is you commit suicide and you're successful, you're probably going to reincarnate again. You will incarnate and the challenge you had before will be double what it was. You're going to get twice as hard as you had it before to push your soul to meet the challenge. I would propose a potential theory, and I don't really have the hard evidence, but I would propose a theory. You commit suicide, you're going to get this, whatever caused you to commit suicide, you're going to get it next life harder. And if you commit suicide again, you're going to get it back again, and you're going to get it harder. Because each life that you go through, your soul, which I believe is continuous, learns. There is learning in that experience, and they will meet the challenge, and they'll continue to incarnate over and over again with the objective to meet those challenges until the soul learns and grows and said, it's not necessary for me to be guilty about this or that. It's not necessary for me to be jealous of other people or envious of other people. So this is kind of the religious dogmas press these issues. Don't be like this and this and this and this. And I think that's part of that is reality in the sense that when we incarnate, those are the challenges that we get to experience in the lives.
It's a great explanation. I really like the piece about discouraging people from committing suicide because from what I've gathered, the accounts I've read about, the two things people get from any kind of NDE is there's two things that are forbidden. One is taking someone's life or your own. Those are the two things they come away with. It's definitely a good thing to hear. Bob, thanks for coming on to the show today. How can our listeners find you online?
You can find me. I have a website. It's called bobfranksite, SITE.com. And so I've got all the three novels in this, and I've just co-wrote another novel called Cloud to Cloud with a co-author. And this particular one is really interesting. It's taking the concepts of my theory of reality and put them on steroids. And it's basically connecting our current, I'll call it the data cloud, everything we touch on the computer, to the other cloud, which is, they refer to it as the Akashic, which is the data cloud in the other realm. So and we had a lot of fun with this one, play the whole games with it, but we built upon, the past life theories, because these people, all the players were past lives together. incarnated over and over again. They had the same things again and again. We have ghosts in there. We got NDEs in there. So all kinds of interesting things. So they can find all that on the website. And most of the books you can get for free or very little. I'm not into the making, money on the books and all. I'm conveying messages.
I'll put the links in the show notes, and that sounds really, really cool, and probably a part 2. Definitely discussion for another day, but I look forward to that.
That'd be great.
You've been listening to Closer to Venus. This is Johnny Burke. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.